Hi everyone, welcome back to The Mystic in the Woods. I'm Kate, and today we are going to be talking about working with the archetype of the devil. So you may have seen that when I uploaded this, I also uploaded a workshop announcement for a 6-week intensive journey into the 3 faces of the devil that we will be doing starting on November 13th, which I'm really excited about. My intention for this video is to give you a little bit of a taste of what we'll be covering in there, as well as book recommendations and tarot recommendations and things like that, so that if now isn't the right time for you to join the workshop, but you do want to begin working with one of these faces of the sacred masculine, that you have some jumping off points to do that. Now, the reason that I am so in love with working with these 3 faces of the sacred masculine, so we're looking at Lucifer, Satan, and the horned god, as 3 separate archetypes, 3 separate beings that all lent various aspects of their myth to the singular devil myth, that Christianity created over multiple thousands of years. These 3 separate archetypes, these 3 separate beings, each offered a different piece to the myth of the devil, but none of them are the Christian devil. None of them are the arch nemesis of God, right? So we're looking at Lucifer, the fallen angel. We're looking at Satan, who was originally actually working on behalf of God, and then the various horned deities from European traditions that lent their image to the myth of the devil. And so when we are talking about this in any way, of course, this is a topic that has a visceral reaction from most people, even if you're no longer Christian, even if you've been deconstructing that and working with, the sacred feminine or whatever for years. Often this is a topic that has a visceral reaction for people because this is the myth that holds the whole Christian thing together. You'd think it would be Jesus, but really without the devil, the whole thing starts to unravel. This is what we've been so conditioned to fear, and this is what holds our magic so tight. So when we talk about, let's start with Lucifer, then we'll move into Satan, and then we'll move into the horned gods, and then we'll get into book and deck recommendations. So Lucifer, of course, and I'm about to cram, 3,000 years of, maybe more, of history into 5 minutes. So of course I'm going to speak in generalizations, and I'm going to give you the highlights, not the whole thing. But of course, Lucifer's myth comes out of the Venusian traditions, okay? His name means light bringer. He's known as the morning star. He was the embodiment or whatever I'm trying to say there of the planet Venus. And he's only mentioned once in the Bible. And it's not a reference to Lucifer, the fallen angel. It is a sort of jab at a specific king of the time. The idea of Lucifer, who then falls and becomes Satan, develops over time. It required not just apocryphal texts, so we do see references to this in the Book of Enoch, I believe, if my brain is working correctly today. But it's not this big grand war against God that we come to see later. It actually took, for example, multiple other books and apocryphal texts to create Lucifer as the fallen angel, as the devil who was in the Garden of Eden and rules hell. And we see that come together through, again, multiple apocryphal texts and also works like Paradise Lost by Milton, which was actually an epic poem that came out of a historical event in which Milton was trying to be the next Shakespeare. And this was a very specific moment in England's history where they were trying to overthrow the monarchy and actually failed. And so in Milton's Paradise Lost, we actually see God as the bad guy here in this epic poem. But it did take all of this. It took Dante's Inferno, all of these different satirical pieces and epic poetry to become a part of the culture of the time to eventually create this idea of Lucifer as the ruler of hell. Now, we do see it in the apocryphal texts. We're going to go into all of this in the course. For example, where is it? Let me look at my timeline here. We have The Life of Adam and Eve, which is a book that's not currently in the Bible, which was written in 70 to 20 before Common Era, so BC. The Book of Enoch was written in the late 2nd century BC, and that's where, again, we see this reference to Lucifer, the fallen angel, but we really don't get that myth fleshed out until we get into Milton's Paradise Lost, which, let me look at my list here, is in 1664. So this idea of Lucifer as the devil is actually very, very modern. Now, I don't have any super great book recommendations on the, on the myth of Lucifer, because whenever I go to find a book on the myth of Lucifer, what I get are books on the myth of Satan. And Lucifer is never mentioned in those books. Now, there is one book, I will put it right here. This is like The Secret History of Lucifer or something. This is a good book, but it hardly addresses Lucifer, the fallen angel. It's talking about the Lightbringer aspect, the myth of the devil, kind of all of that stuff. So what we do see more of is Satan, and I have a couple of books on Satan. What's important to understand is that the mythology of Satan, again, evolves over time. In the beginning of the sacred texts that we still have, we see Satan as a concept. It means opposer, adversary, something like that. So I can be Satan tomorrow, you can be, today, you can be Satan tomorrow. It's just somebody fulfilling this role of opposer or adversary. Now, over time, we do see that evolve into a sort of title or a role on the divine court, where there is a being given the title of Satan, whose job is in very arguably, God's executioner, the one sent by God to test people. He is working on behalf of God. And then from there, we start to see that evolve into a singular being whose name is Satan, that then eventually, again, becomes this evil being that we can place all of our, bad desires on, essentially. For books for this, I do have one. I'll be really honest with you guys, this book is written for other scholars and is very heavy and dense, but this is called Satan, How God's Executioner Became the Enemy, by Ryan E. Stokes. I will put this in the description below. This is an excellent scholarly book on the history of the devil. Another good one is... Okay, I knew I had it sitting here. Satan and the problem of evil, constructing a Trinitarian warfare theology. I'll put this in the comments or the description as well. This is, again, dense, good. And then this is, we see Satan referred to a lot in the Old Testament. But again, we're seeing that evolution from concept to title to individual being. Now, as that had already, the Lucifer Satan thing had begun to come together and formalize for the Christian canon over, 1,000 years, then we see Christianity start to move through Europe and start to clash with the various horned deities in Europe. So we have Pan, especially Kernonos. We have the idea of the white stag, even deities or goddesses like Artemis with the horns. Anything with a horn or an antler was very quickly associated with the devil, and that is where we get this picture of the devil with horns and goat-like features, or maybe deer-like features, usually goat, right? These horns, the goat-like features, the hooves. This is where we start to see that come into play, where we have the idea of Pan, satyrs, and eventually other horned deities throughout Europe. And we really see this fleshed out in the witch trials, when women were being put on trial throughout Europe for witchcraft, and we see this in the records of that, right? So the devil came to me in a dream, the devil gave me a familiar, I did this and that and whatever, and the devil appeared. And so this is where we're getting into the idea of a folkloric devil. And it was, this, again, evolution over time, where all of those folkloric devils, all of those horned gods that were known for working with witches, were then also brought into this myth of the devil, where Lucifer, Satan, and anything with horns became one thing. So this is a really brief overview of how these three different deities slash myths or archetypes really came into one. Now, for the horned god, of course, Gemma Gary's book, which I will put here, is really good on the folkloric devil. I also really enjoy the book, we'll talk about the Witch Sisters Tarot here in a second. Oh, I do have the book here. The guidebook in here, though, talks about the horned god. It also talks about the white stag. So that actually is, I found, a really helpful book on that mythology as well, especially as it relates to Celtic traditions, right? Celtic folklore. So when we start to talk about working with these beings, we've talked a little bit about the mythology, where you can learn more about the scholarship. And of course, I will be going really deep into this in the workshop. But when we start to talk about working with them in a personal capacity, and we start to talk about personal gnosis, I still experience these three deities as very separate beings. So let's talk about Lucifer first, and let's do some book recommendation or deck recommendations. So first, I'll mention these in pair. As a pair, we've got the True Black Tarot and the Ephemer Tarot. I can never remember how to say that. It's by the same people who created, same artist who created True Black. I will be honest with you. I still have this deck in order. I've been studying it a little bit. This is a little bit, I'm not sure if this deck is for me, is what I want to say. But I do think that for working with Lucifer in his fallen angel Lightbringer capacity, that this could be a really beautiful deck for that, especially if you already have it in your collection, if you're looking for a way into the deck, if you are, like if you have this deck especially, I do think that this could be an excellent deck for working with Lucifer. For me, I personally do experience Lucifer as a very light being, where he brings light into the darkness, which is why I also like the True Black Tarot. Where again, so here we really have this idea of bringing light into the darkness in the artwork. And of course, Lucifer is a being of duality, okay? We can't have the light without the dark. And he's a really powerful sacred masculine guide for bringing that light into the darkness, for helping us to unravel, the next layer of conditioning around Christianity and fear around that type of thing. Sorry, I had a couple warnings pop up on my computer there. So I do really love this deck for working with Lucifer in that capacity. Now, what I will also say, and I'm sorry if these are blurry, I didn't think that they were. When we're talking about working with Lucifer in that capacity, Lightbringer is a title, right? And that title can also be ascribed to other beings throughout, history and theology, such as Jesus and Mary Magdalene as Lightbringer. So in the workshop, we will be working with Lucifer and his myth in this capacity, and also Magdalene and her capacity as a Lightbringer. Now, this is one I will not even try to say. I think this is an excellent, excellent deck for working with Lucifer, especially around fear that is still coming up in regards to religious wounding. This deck goes through the myth of the maiden and the wolf. And I very much do experience Lucifer kind of like that. Especially in the beginning when he was working with me. He would kind of approach me with this, like the same energy you might approach a prey animal with if you're trying to befriend them, right? Like a scared little fawn or something like that. That's how Lucifer would often approach me in the beginning. Now, he is a sacred masculine being. He can be, I do know people who work with him, and he can be a little bit more blunt. This deck is very visceral, but I do think that is an excellent deck for working with him. I have two more decks here. These are the most decks that I have for all of them. This next one might surprise you. This is the White Light Oracle by Alana Fairchild. This is also on my Magdalene list, which again makes sense because they both carry that title of Lightbringer. Now, of course, this is a more gentle deck, and Lucifer can be a little more blunt than this. But I find this, especially in combination with something like the True Black, to be an just a really powerful way to get messages from Lucifer and to work with him. Now, having said that, I personally actually work with Lucifer primarily within journey work. Card work takes a back seat for me with that particular guide for me. But there's one more deck here that I want to talk about briefly, and I do think that this is a great deck for, this is the Lucifer Tarot, for working with Lucifer in the wounded child aspect. In the way that even the sacred masculine can be playful. In the way that even the sacred masculine can be gentle. And so I do really love this deck for that work, actually, very specifically. And this deck does have a couple of my favorite depictions of cards. Here's a Lilith card. So there's two extra cards in this deck. There's Lilith and Lucifer. Here's the Hermit. So this deck can actually be a really beautiful way into that aspect of working with the sacred masculine, especially in regards to Lucifer himself. Okay, so let's move into Satan. So Satan for me is a harsher guide, but still loving, okay? He also, for me, is very much about that sacred void. So this is where in the workshop we'll be talking about the sacred void, trusting the sacred void, the wisdom that comes from the darkness. We'll be talking about that in relationship to Satan as well as Sophia. So for working with Satan, I have a few different decks here. So first is Tarot of the Abyss, okay? And I'm going to try to go quickly because I don't want this video to be like too long. But I do think that, you know, when we get this black and white imagery that's a little bit more gritty, a little bit more dirty than the true black, that's where we start to find, for me, that difference between the Satan and the Lucifer mythology and the Satan and the Lucifer as they show up in my personal gnosis. For me, Lucifer is about, again, that light bringer, bring the duality, bringing the light into the darkness, and then Satan is grittier. He's more of the earth. He's more of the void. And so that's where we get into something like that, Tarot of the Abyss. Now, I also actually really like, this is the Shamanic Healing Oracle. This is the Shamanic Healing Oracle. Here's the box for it. For this as well. It's a little bit softer than how I experience this particular being. But again, I feel that void energy. I feel that sacred masculine energy that comes from the earth, that comes from the darkness. This is a fairly balanced deck, and also very, in my opinion, easy to read. Okay, so then let's talk about my two favorite decks for this. Tarot-wise is the Darkness of Light Tarot. Now, you guys have heard me talk about this deck before because this is one of my workhorse decks that I can use for everything all the time. I love this deck. It was also on my Sacred Masculine deck list that I did, I don't know, last year maybe, or months ago at least. So again, in this deck, we have that darkness, we have that grittiness, we have that, in my opinion, more masculine feel. And I have found this deck is one of the most versatile decks in my collection, which I do plan on doing like a workhorse deck list video to talk specifically about my most usable, versatile, workhorsey decks. But it's also a great deck for any face of the divine masculine, as been specifically Satan, in my opinion. All right, Fallen Angels Oracle. Let's see. We're already at 20 minutes almost. So, Fallen Angels Oracle. As an Oracle deck, this is an excellent one to, I think, get messages from Satan. I don't love the box because I'm always losing cards inside of it. This is a Goetic Infernal deck. This is not how I work with the Goetic Infernals. This is not how I experience them, necessarily. The artwork and the feel of the deck, yes, but not necessarily how they're portrayed in the guidebook. But having said that, the guidebook has a lot of good information in it. The artwork is gritty and dark. It's very, very, very balanced. So here, this one says rebirth, settlement, evaluation, and then we get secrecy, history, upheaval. Okay? This is what Satan feels like to me. So what I would do if I was going to pull cards from this deck to communicate with that being, yes, there are names, like of different infernals on the cards, but I would think about them more as a message from the particular face of deity that I'm pulling cards for. And in this case, for me, if on this list, we're talking about Satan. Okay, so those are my 2 top decks for that particular face of deity. Whew. All right. Let's talk about the Horned God. Now, Horned God, I am not speaking here, and I have my earbuds into there's a deranged fly in my office, and this way I don't have to hear them. But when we're talking about the Horned God, I am not speaking of the Wiccan Horned God, and I am speaking of this as an archetype. Because, again, this is where I get into mythology of Pan, this is where I get into mythology of Baphomet, this is where I get into mythology of Cernunnos and the white stag, that type of thing. So, the folkloric devil, local spirit devils, where people will talk about, again, like a folkloric land-based spirit. And my personal experience is primarily with the white stag and Cernunnos. Well, I might not even pronouncing his name correctly. But in any of those cases, this god is always of the forest, of virality, sexuality, wildness, the dark, wild places. He's about the wildness that is masculinity. So having said that, these are the decks for me that work for that. So let's start with the Hush Tarot. This is just an earthy, dark-ish deck that I think works for a lot of things, especially anything based of nature, right? So some people experience this in the Fae, some people experience this in the land spirits. I do think that this deck can work well for the Horned God. Having said that, I don't personally use it for that reason. But you guys also, if you've been around a while, it's like one of my top tarot decks of all time. When we are talking about the Horned God specifically as the white stag, Julia Jeffries' Into the Hidden Realms or Journey into the Hidden Realms, this tarot deck holds that energy for me. The ethereal, magical, into the mist and the forests with the white stag and the second sight that comes with him and all the things, right? This deck feels a little bit more like that to me than her other deck, which we can talk about next, which is the Witch Sisters Tarot, which if you've been around recently, this is now one of my top tarot decks of all time, which I will be doing a top 10 deck list soon. This white stag, yes, that also. The stag in general, so like here the magician is the stag. And you're going to see in this tarot deck all the horned beings. Okay? This is the initiation, which is the hanged man, which, again, stag. This deck, for me, is great for working with the... and really... Well, I'm trying to figure out how I want to say that. Really good for the stag, the white stag, and also Cernunnos and the horned gods associated with the land that we know as England and the British Isles before the English Empire was a thing. So this deck can be really beautiful, I think, for that as well. And then finally is the Old Ways Magic Oracle. And I'm pretty sure that he even has his own card in here. Cernunnos or the Horned God. Again, When I experience this energy, this is the Lord of the Forest. This is the masculine energy of the forest itself, of the wild places itself, of the magic that lies in those wild places. It is how our humanity is part of the magic of the wild places, not separate from it. And so this deck, again, we have a lot of stag energy showing up. We have a lot of horned energy showing up. Here's just another horned being. Let me see if I can find... but it's just a very wild deck. It has a really unique energy and unique medicine. And I think that this is beautiful for connecting with the horned god or the stag, and specifically that idea of Kernonos. And that might have been the image that I was thinking of there. Here we have another horned, there we go, wild mage. So you can see all of the really beautiful horned imagery that's in this deck. And this is just this whole, here's the green man. This whole deck is visceral, and it is of the wild, magical, old forests. So these are my top decks for working with all three of those aspects of, again, this like devil archetype, or these three faces of the sacred masculine. So if you're interested in going deeper with me, remember, of course, that workshop is available. We start on November 13th. I am so excited to deep dive into these three faces of the sacred masculine with you, and to really bring out that healing and that magic and that wisdom that each of them has to offer us. So if you have any questions, let me know. If there's any decks you would like me to speak more on, let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.